I want you to know that last night I set
Mhm.
up my alarm to wake
Okay.
up to spooky, scary skeletons. But what I neglected to do was to check the audio. So at
Okay.
8:30 in the morning, all I hear is loud as you had that ready. That's impressive.
Yeah, it's one of my wallpapers.
All right, let's roll that. Maybe spooky intro music. We'll see. All right, guys, welcome back to the very first Spookcast. That's what I'm gonna start calling it. Spookcast, Spooktober
Just for
podcast,
October. Okay.
whatever
Good.
whatever you want to call it. We're gonna be dressing up in our little Halloween costumes each episode. So I don't know. I mean, if you guys want to give us suggestions, give us suggestions. But I don't know about
All
you,
all
Thor.
all all mine are gonna be
Are gonna be
onesies.
onesies.
There's no way I'm wearing.
You
Nope.
gotta you gotta get you gotta get that Appa onesie. Just saying.
I could.
I'm
I
just
don't know if
saying.
it'll be here on time.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
I will say I ordered these. Oh, that's the first time I remember that I'm inverted, so I have to point out. I ordered these nice for you audio listeners. I ordered these really nice color changing lights for the streams, and they're super nice. I like the aesthetic. But yeah, like we mentioned, guys, welcome to the very first October Halloween themed podcast. I'm very excited to do this. I don't know about you,
What's up,
though. I love
guys?
Halloween season. I
I'm
just
indifferent about
recently
Halloween season.
I love Halloween season. I just
I
recently, the last few years, got into horror movies and different horror things, but I've always
I
loved the
I love Halloween
supernatural.
season only for the horror movies, but like, I mean, as you know, I don't like candy. So like, everyone's like, "Oh, we get to dress up and go get candy," and I was like, really doesn't
You're
interest me.
like, that's my nightmare.
Yeah, it's
But yeah,
like
guys, we're here, with like we said, we have a few episodes planned out for some spooky topics. But the first one I thought we would have a little bit, kind of like the
just right
last
down
one,
my
more.
alley because I'm the film guy here.
You're the film guy. So obviously, horror movies are a big thing when spooky season rolls around. And obviously, for years now, almost since cinema has been around, the horror genre has expanded and, we get a bunch of hits and as you know, we got some classics and, now we have some modern ones that are kind of also getting there. So kind of the discussion that I wanted to have today is just a general one of kind of old school movies versus new school because there is sort of a comparison when you look at it. Just like you can do it with any sort of film genre, with sci-fi, with fantasy, all that. So with spooky season, I thought that would be a great place to start off with. So right off the bat, I gotta know just to kind of see where we're going to be leaning towards, and sort of the idea. Do you lean more towards the old school cinema of horror movies, or do you lean more towards the newer sort of genre?
So I mean, I guess you could probably know this was gonna happen. Um, I'm the type of person that it's like difficult to answer that question because I like both of them. I particularly like if you had a gun to my head or a Texas Chainsaw Massacre to my head, and told me to choose one of them, I'd probably choose New School. Just because obviously it's what I grew up in, and then as a film person, um, I appreciate the things that kind of set the tone, um, like all the slashers, obviously, all the Exorcist movie, and stuff like that. I appreciate those horror movies, and I appreciate what they did for the genre in cinema. But I personally think that we're living in the golden
The new
time of
I was about to
horror
say the
cinema.
new age, the new
Yeah,
age. I
I
got you.
think that the original slasher genre and the amazing like boost in sales that they had back in the day, I would consider that the silver age of horror. I think we're living in the golden age of horror films.
All right. So this discussion is going to be a lot more interesting than I thought it was going to be because I prefer old school, and I thought you were going to
Okay.
go old school too, ironically. So
No.
nothing wrong there. Me and you have our similarities in a lot of things, but sometimes we're going to differentiate. And
Mm-hmm.
this isn't going to be a debate. This is going to be sort of our views and all that. Because I do like New Age, and I do think that I'll get into a little bit later that in the last few years, last few decades, we have had some really, really good horror movies, but on the opposite side, I also think we've had some really, really bad horror movies. And
Agreed.
sometimes it's also with, we'll get into a little bit more, but also sequel horror movies that we have these sequels and remakes of horror movies that some are good and then some are just really not good. Right off the bat, I mean, and that's something we can get a little bit into to kind of segue into where we all think with these horror movies that are kind of remade and remake. Do you think that's we always come back to the discussion is are remakes good or not? But in my opinion, I think it depends on who's in charge of it in the source material.
So
Because
so what I if you watch our last podcast, when I was editing it and you brought up that topic of remakes, I made a graphic that said reboots suck, but remakes are fine.
and I did notice that.
Um,
I'm watching it in the background while I'm doing
so
some work, and I
what I
just got
meant,
to that.
yeah, what I meant by that was if you reboot something from where you left off, 99% of the time it's not gonna be good because you're trying to remake a feeling that a certain group of people had that made it good. For example, um I don't think that the Child's Play movies are going to be bad, the new ones that are coming out, because what they're doing is that they're going back to the original source material and they're remaking it for a newer generation. And we talked about this last podcast about Teen Titans is a good example. If they were to reboot the old Teen Titans and kind of leave do what they left off of, I don't know if it would be as good because I thought it was good from where it was, but they remade it. Yeah, they remade it into Teen Titans Go, and for the generation that's it's for now, it's good. Um, but obviously, like I'm wrong sometimes. Like the It movies, I think the It movies are the
I
It
was
movies nowadays are 100% better than the It movies
and
back
I was
when.
gonna bring up that point of kind of I do think that horror movies, especially these kind of remakes, rehashings, can be good depending on what it's adapting and sort of who's in charge. Because me and you talked about it. I'm a personal fan of the new It movies, and I think that it had a really good blend of modern day horror elements. Obviously, the CGI was the biggest change from the old, which it wasn't even a movie. It was what was it? It was a TV
It
special,
was like
whatever
a
you want to
TV
call it. TV,
special, like
yeah,
long
TV
series. Yeah,
movie, mini series.
it was
That's
a
what I
miniseries.
was
There we
looking
go.
for.
Yeah, yeah.
But obviously it benefited from these new CGI graphics, and but I do think that it still kind of kept, especially the first part, it chapter one, kept a lot of the
Yeah,
core sort of
I mean,
thematics and the
I
certain themes from there.
there's also a part of me that that doesn't want to use it as an example, because it's like the It movie is so much better than the old one because the old one sucked,
Yeah, and I
and the
do
old
have an
one
example.
was made fun of because it wasn't that great.
Yes, and I do have an example of and then a horror remake that was not as good as either its adaptation or its movie counterpart, which is
Hmm.
Pet Cemetery, the newest one that
I
came out
haven't
about
watched
a
it.
year ago. I'm not gonna spoil it because, like I said, I try to do these podcasts without many spoilers. But I went into it very very excited because I'm a big fan of Stephen King, and like I said,
Of
it's more
course.
recently that I've kind of gotten that horror movie craving. But I was a big fan of the 19 whatever it was 80 82 whatever year it came out, the that Pet Cemetery.
Yeah.
And this one was just, in my opinion, once again, if you like Pet Cemetery, by all means, you like Pet Cemetery. But this new one, I watched it with Cozy and Nick, and we kind of love the theater. Like that was bad because it kind of was trying to find its pacing. The movie was very slow, and then when
Hmm.
it did finally get to the big, I guess, minor spoiler, which is just the old, the actual plot of the film where his kid dies, which is the whole
Of course.
catalyst for the movie. It takes a while to get to that point, and then everything kind of feels rushed after that. And they had like a plot twist, which was different from the original. That wasn't that even that good of a plot twist. So
I mean,
that's a movie that I think that
I
it
obviously
depends.
I obviously haven't watched the film, like I said. But what you're implying is that it had a pacing issue, and in every other genre of film, you could have a pacing issue, and you could be fine. I mean, pacing issues are problems, but if like Inception has a pacing issue, but that movie's beloved. It's a great movie. Don't get me wrong.
I
But
did
if
I
it,
did I do hear a lot of things, and I think me and you have talked about it, how Nolan in general, a lot of his movies have pacing issues,
Of
but
course.
there is a payoff,
Yeah, yeah.
and
And
that's
but
what it is. You know?
the problem is that Nolan understands the genres he's doing it in, so you can have a pacing issue and you'll be fine. But for horror films, that like the entire point of it is to build suspense and then pay off that suspense. If you have a pacing issue, you're just shit. It's gonna be a bad film. There's no way to come back from a pacing issue. At least I have never seen a good horror film that has a pacing issue.
Yes,
It just
and
I don't think it
I
exists.
will say that me and you have in our numerous film TV discussions that
Discussions,
we've
yeah.
had, I do think that the most important part in horror movies is definitely pacing, suspense, and atmosphere.
Okay,
And I think those three are very important. And
I
you
agree.
especially see the suspense aspect in a lot of old school horror movies because CGI wasn't really a thing back then, especially in these sort of 80s slasher films where some of them have like CGI, but it's obviously not polished. But so a lot of these movies did rely on that sort of suspense of giving the audience, and that came with some of these super. I wish we could play them because we would get copyrights, right? But these super iconic sort of themes, like Halloween has one of the greatest soundtracks of all time, and that it's just etched in cinema. Or even Friday the 13th with the it's these moments that kind of build the suspense for the audience and make them go, what's happening? Who's the killer? And even I was about to say scary movie. Even Scream did a really good job with kind of even being a satire, but still kind of making fun of, but still incorporating these horror movie tropes that now kind of become commonplace in modern horror. So I
I
think
mean,
old school horror movies benefit from that, from the pacing and from the suspense building.
you know that I can talk about the history of horror movies starting with Halloween for like ever. You know that that is like my bread and butter. Um, but I agree with you. I think that I think a true highlight of the older generation of horror movies was their scores. I mean, iconic scores of Halloween. If we go even farther back from Halloween, we have I
We're thinking the same thing because I was gonna mention it as one of my tops, and
I
Psycho.
Psycho. There we go.
Because
I was gonna say Bates
all
Hotel, and I was like, that's
yeah.
not right.
What's funny is I always mix those two up too, because there's the show Bates Motel
Of
that came out a
course,
few years ago. But I'm
of
always like,
course,
Psycho, that's right. But Psycho to
Psycho.
me stands as a pinnacle because Psycho is from what, the 50s, the 60s?
I mean,
And
Psycho was the
Psycho still holds
first.
up.
Psycho, in my opinion, is the first. At least in Hollywood, the first like true. I would say scary movie. I wouldn't say horror movie just yet because the
Yeah,
genre.
I do think
Um,
that Psycho is more psychological than it is horror. And like I said, I love the reason I love Psycho so much is because of
I
that.
mean,
Psycho isn't anything fancy. It's not like there's a ton of special effects. It really is just about kind of suspense and sort of going into, all right, Norman Bates is not the guy that he seems
is
he
a
is.
psycho.
And
Is a
that ending
psycho.
is still one of the most powerful endings in horror.
It's
With the
chilling.
skeleton. Yeah.
That ending is chilling. But going back to the music, I mean the scene, the iconic scene where he fucking sorry, yeah,
No,
that
no.
that pretty much decided how horror films were gonna sound. Like everything else is just an iteration or a version of that. I would say that Halloween kind of found its own grounds, but Friday the 13th, if you really listen to it, it sounds like that. Nightmare on Elm Street, it sounds like that. I mean, even if you go to Jaws, like the dun is just another type of suspenseful, like 3 string progression of that theme. So
I
I would
I
say, go. What's up?
I need to know this because I want to have this like mini discussion. Do you
Mm-hmm.
consider Jaws a horror movie?
I consider it a. I mean, then we get into. You see, this is where me, the film buff, gets into like the tough
Yeah, no,
debates because
I'm just curious because
do
it's
we
like
say
Jaws is a chilling
horror?
movie, but
For me, the way that I see it is I see a thriller as the big like overarching category, and then I see horror as a specific subcategory because I think that horror specifically wants to scare you, while thriller wants to while
Build
a
up the
thriller's
suspense.
job, yeah, while a thriller's job is to build and pay off suspense, and that's what a horror is.
Yeah,
I would say that Jaws is a thriller, but then it's your own prerogative to say if it falls into the horror. I mean, also, again, I you know how I get with this. I would
the
say
film guy.
that back
Yes,
in the day, I would say Jaws was a horror film, because it played with the entire concept of the unknown and stuff like that. But
of
I
course.
would say like if you showed it to a 17-year-old that now who had never seen Jaws, they'd be like, okay, it's a thriller. Because I think that it's like it's not as scary anymore because of how disseminated and easy it is to see, um to get information through Jaws. If you put it down to its bare bones, is the fear of the unknown.
Of course. And
um
I do think that thriller and horror have always kind of had this line that it's a very thin line of what you want to interpret. Because one of my favorite thrillers is The Gift, which, by the way, if you haven't seen it,
yeah,
go watch it. Amazing movie. But The Gift did really good with not being a horror movie, but still kind of creating that dread and kind of creating that suspense. So
yeah,
thrillers and horrors, that's a whole different discussion that we can have as
yeah.
well.
Let's
But
just assume right now that they're one and the same,
yeah,
because if not, this discussion will last 2 to 3
of
hours.
course. But yeah, going back to, and I think this will be kind of my segue into, the topic that me and you, that that I always have a strong feeling about,
Of
which
course.
is movies back then, old school horror movies relied on that suspense to the point that one of still the most iconic, talked about horror movies is The Exorcist.
Yeah,
The Exorcist was a movie that, obviously, The Exorcist is also riddled with kind of behind the stage scary like stuff that happened, which
yeah,
I don't remember what the documentary is called, but there's a documentary about like the filming of it and like how people died and like it's like a cursed set or whatever, but whatever. But The Exorcist, I'll say this joke, like my family knows this. The Exorcist was my dad's first and last horror movie because it etched in his brain. Because once again, back then in the 70s and the 60s, horror movies weren't a thing. Like you had these movies every now and again, like like our Psychos and the Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. These movies that were a little bit there, but it wasn't until The Exorcist came out that people were like, there are movies that can shake you to your core.
yeah.
And same thing with Exorcist. Exorcist wasn't fancy CGI. Exorcist was all practical effects. It was
I mean,
the head spinning, the throwing up, the contortionist, being filmed at a different angle so it looks like they're on the roof. To this day, Exorcist is still a movie that I will never watch again because it still terrifies me.
yeah. I mean, Exorcist has a thing, and I don't quite understand it. Um, I say I've watched so many like horror films that it's very very difficult to make me feel fright. It's easy to make my heart kind of beat faster, to get chills, because you're a good film if you can continuously do that. But Exorcist to this day is still one of those things. It still causes me like fear. And I think the impact that it had on me and probably a generation watching the newer stuff kind of made some of the newer stuff a little bit better than it should have.
Now, this is another little mini discussion we can have based off this
Yeah,
Exorcist topic. Obviously, The Exorcist is based off, something that happened. Obviously, an
yeah,
interpretation of something that happened. But
yeah.
when you go into a horror movie, does it change your perception if you know that it's based off something like that?
It it used
Like
to.
like The Conjuring and all these movies
Yeah,
that are based off, real life events.
it used to. Because like obviously when I was younger, I was like, oh, if it's based off true events, then it must be like everything I see on the film must be true. But as I got older and I started to see like the way like the way things are shot and started to understand that type of stuff, it doesn't scare me as much anymore, because obviously I know that most of the directors and stuff have a lot of artistic freedom.
Yeah.
Um, but if it's based on a true story, I think the last one that truly terrified me that was based on a true story was the original first Conjuring, and it wasn't because it was based on a true story. It has more to do with the way that Exorcist kind of molded me, and the way I watch things.
Yeah, Conjuring is definitely, and like I told you, I do think, and we can segue now into this because, like you said, I can go on old school horror
Yeah.
for hours, but I definitely think there are a lot of modern horror movies that do bring it back to the roots. That my biggest thing, and this will be my segue into the thing I hate the most. I
Mhm.
don't like horror movies that solely rely on jump scares
I
because
mean, you know how I feel about those. You
yeah,
know how I feel about jump scares. If you rely on a jump scare, then you're, in my opinion, immediately a B tier horror film.
and there's nothing wrong, and you've talked about there's nothing wrong with having jump scares in your film as long as it's earned. You know,
Yeah.
like I think going to the more modern ones that we were talking about, it does really good with having these jump scares that kind of
Hmm.
like you know they're coming, but they still feel earned. And The Conjuring does really really good with earned jump scares. And another one which I talk about a lot is Insidious, and especially the
Hmm.
first one. Insidious is a modern horror movie, which ironically both Insidious and Conjuring were by James Wan, which James Wan is like a
Yeah.
horror,
No,
like
James Wan has been on a roll.
yeah.
But if you feel all that way about modern horror films, then why do you prefer the older ones?
And I do think it does come down to sort of that, which is a lot of horror movies do feel that they're just trying to emanate previous things. It's very rare.
Hmm.
And I will bring up some instances that I do think horror movie kind of does have different things, but it's very rare these days to see a horror movie that isn't either a quote unquote remake or reboot, and not just a remake or reboot, but kind of telling a story that's already been told,
You
or
see, I
kind of
kind
just
of
having it
I disagree
adapted.
with that.
But I will say, and I know the ones you're going to bring up, there are a lot of
Okay.
really, really good, iconic, and now modern ones. We have obviously Jordan Peele is on a roll with Get Out and Us, which both phenomenal movies, not just as horror movies,
Mm.
but as sort of psychological, cinematic pieces. Obviously, me and you talk about this one a lot. Midsummer. Midsummer, I thought was a really, which Midsummer is also kind of what I also talked about last podcast with,
I mean, at this point, you're Eminem at the end of what is
8 Mile.
the 8 Mile?
8 Mile.
You're like taking all of the my things
No,
away
and
from me.
we can still talk
No,
about it
of
because I
course.
do think they're important. And but the thing is, I do feel that a lot of those movies are also based off perception because Midsummer. Let's be honest, Midsummer is a long movie, and in Midsummer, you can really only watch that movie if you're a avid horror film person because Midsummer is a slow movie, and like I'm
See,
gonna
I
say that.
I would disagree with that too.
But the thing is, like Midsummer, when you look at it, it isn't really until like an hour and a half that things really start picking up
But I
in
think that
terms of horror
agreed,
elements.
agreed, agreed. But I think that the pacing of the movie gets you to that hour and a half just fine.
No, and it does a really well with setting up, and I will
Yeah.
say that it does really well with setting up the main
So
characters'
so
struggles.
here's my argument for why um we're in the golden age. And you and I are obviously disagreeing, but here's why. I think that I think when we look back at the old age, I have it on my screen now. You can pretty much look at the things that kind of made the old age of horror, the really popular ones. We're talking about Halloween, Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Nightmare on Elm Street. We're talking about Chucky. We're talking about Candyman. We're talking about Saw. Is there any of them that I haven't missed that you would say are iconic old horror films? Pet Cemetery.
Do we? No, I wouldn't count this. Never mind. No, I'm gonna be quiet.
No, no, no. Say it. Why not?
I was gonna say because no, I don't consider this one horror. 2001: A Space Odyssey, but that's more sci-fi than
Yeah,
horror.
that's more sci-fi. That's
Yeah,
more. That
I think
might
no,
touch
I
on,
think
but
I
yeah,
think
yeah,
you hit the
yeah.
nail. And then
So
obviously,
I hit.
once
Do you? So I hit the nail on the iconic ones, right? The ones that you would say Like if we were to have a battle,
Oh,
you would put these
Shining,
films.
The
Okay,
Shining.
The
Like,
Shining. The
yeah,
Shining's a good
that's
one.
also up there.
So these are the films that if we were having a battle of new school versus old school, you would put all of these films at the very forefront.
I mean, yeah, obviously, and like I said,
Okay.
I'm sure there's, like you said, I'm sure
Which
there's some more
which
missing, but
no, I'm sure, but these are the ones that easily come to mind.
of course,
So my argument is, what do all of those have in common?
they don't have CGI.
No, that's not what I'm getting at. What all of those have in common is that, and you can see it on my screen, they all have a killer. All of them are focused on a singular like entity that is that has this animosity for whoever we're following. And
Of course.
don't get me wrong. Don't get me wrong. I love the genre. You can get me to talk about Halloween for 6 hours straight. You can get me to talk about how the way that Scream subverted everything that the slasher film kind of
Started.
started. I like you know me. But the reason that I think that we're in the golden age is because the golden age right now, we've been able to continue that. We've been able to continue making these monsters. The Babadook is an example of one.
Such a
But
great movie.
it's such a great movie. Insidious is another one. We have these oh we have these almost these entities that we can still look at and say, "Oh yeah, they're iconic entities." But then you have things like Midsommar, you have things like Hereditary, you have things like The Haunting at Hill House, which you have things like Us, where it uses the horror of our everyday. The horror that the horror films that are popular now, quote unquote, they use the monsters that we have in our own heads to kind of make us scared. And I think that's why we're in the golden age, because I'm more scared.
That's something that I do. That's something that I do appreciate about a lot of more modern horror movies. You know, you brought up, and this is another one that I know me and you have also talked about a lot. You know, Hereditary, which at its core, Hereditary really is about the sort of family kind of drifting apart after experiencing trauma. The movie deals a lot with trauma. And you know, we have Us, which is such a great film that dives into a lot more thematic themes. But you know, I do appreciate those. And one that we haven't talked about yet, but I also think is important talking about modern horror, was Paranormal Activity. The very first Paranormal Activity had this phase where for like 2 months, no one knew if that was real or if that was fake.
Yeah. And it's like the Blair Witch Project is the easy for me. Whenever someone brings up Paranormal Activity, I kind of liken it to the Blair Witch Project, which is the way that Paranormal Activity came out, and the way Blair Witch Project came out. It came out in that time that we still didn't have this easily disseminated information that we could get our hands on. So people who went to go watch it were under the impression that these things were just real, because the way that they shot it, the way that the directors and the way that the crew shot it was very clearly meant to look like a horror film. Like not a horror film. It was very clearly meant to look like real life.
It was meant to invoke that fear that you mentioned of, this is just a couple living their everyday life and like things are occurring.
Yeah.
And I think that's where me and you can kind of talk about this a little bit, because at least in my opinion, I do think that after Paranormal Activity 1, the found footage genre did get a little oversaturated. But there are some that
so much
have really good hits, like Wreck. Wreck is a really, really good found footage style movie.
No, and
definitely go check it out.
Hunting for Trolls. It's like a documentary.
Oh, the Troll Hunter?
Yeah,
Yes,
Troll Hunter. There we go.
such a
It's like a found footage documentary-esque type of thing, and it kind of hits into that horror thriller genre. But that's what I'm saying. I love the old ones. Don't get me wrong. I love Halloween. It to this day, and we will talk about this in the next podcast. To this day, it ranks up there, like up to the very top in horror films of my entire life. I
Of course.
love Scream and what it did for the horror genre. But the horror genre has so much freedom now. It has so many voices that they didn't have before. And they're talking about so many things that people wouldn't have used as fear in the past. And the way that it impacts you is so much more scary than other things. Like you said, paranormal activity scared the living daylights out of people because they were looking in these stuff, and the fear when they went home is that stuff could happen to me. The fear of Midsommar, the fear of Us, the fear of what was his first movie? I always forget it.
Get
What
Out.
was Get Out? The fear of Get Out is that the things that they talk about, the overall messages that the films are trying to get are real messages, and they have this veil of fear that the directors are trying to get through. And I don't know. The silent smile at the end of Midsommar is so much more scary to me now than seeing Jason with his knife coming at you. I lose sleep thinking of that smile more than I think of Jason standing over me.
My lights just flickered. It's a sign. Um, no, and I actually have another point that kind of helps in your favor too, which
Yeah,
I think a lot of no, I'm still old school, but like I'm a, you know me, I'm not a I'm right, you're wrong. This is I
course,
like having
of
these.
course. Like,
Um, I think that a lot of foreign horror movies now are really getting notoriety and are really
yeah,
getting to, Train to Busan, which a really good Korean horror film, which kind of
Korea,
revitalized the whole zombie, because let's be honest, the zombie
Korea
brand
is
was getting a little bit old.
Korean
Obviously, we have,
cinema
which
is
we can
killing it out
debate
of the
if this is
park.
horror or thriller. Parasite, which won the Oscar, that was a Korean, which once again, that's a whole different discussion we can
It's
have.
not.
But
I will say it right now. Parasite is not a horror film.
yes, but it
Parasite
just
is a
shows that
thriller. Parasite is a
just
thriller.
show
It's not a horror film. God, go
we have
continue.
this recent one that I don't remember the name of it, that Fernie brought up, but I have to watch it. But we have these you brought up earlier, Troll Hunter. There's a lot of now these international horror films. Like, I don't know if you knew this, Babadook's not American.
No, no, I knew
Babadook
that.
was it was French. I don't
And
remember what
and
country it was based in, but it's these different movies and different
and
things that
and to
get these
kind of
little
reiterate
notoriety.
on my other point, Babadook is a great example of what I'm talking about because Babadook takes what you would consider standard horror. It has an entity that is trying to be that has animosity towards the person we're following,
Of
but the
course.
scares are so they're not in your face like these others. Like, you don't have a moment in Babadook as much than you have Jason standing and going kee, kee, kee. Like you don't have that
Yeah.
moment as much in Babadook. What you do have in Babadook is that moment where she looks at a coat hanger and she sees a coat with those long fingers. And to tell you that has not creeped me out when I look at a coat hanger and I see something that's not supposed to be there, it terrifies me.
No, and definitely Babadook is an example of kind of having an entity there that can still act as that fear factor, but not letting the entity be I guess the main point of the film.
What
Because
I will say,
Baba, yeah,
what I will give you a point on for old horror is that old horror sequels were so much better than the sequels we get nowadays. The
yes.
entire Conjuring universe needs to not have existed.
No, and then with modern horrors we get into like the spin-offs, and when we get into
Yeah,
all these different things. You have it there on your screen. I haven't watched none, but I
it's
heard none is
terrible. It's
terrible because
terrible.
all it
I
is jump
laughed.
scares.
I laughed the
Yeah,
entire time. It was
I
such a
heard that all it is jump scares, and that there's nothing else there other than jump scares.
there's no substance. There's nothing that I watch and I'm suspenseful about because it's like, unfortunately, the old horror, as you watch more and more horror films start being very difficult for you because you start understanding. It's like when you're watching a movie and you're like, I know what's gonna happen because I've watched 100 of these movies. She's gonna fall in love with him, and then they're gonna have a fight, and then they're not gonna be in love with him anymore, and then something grand is gonna happen. That's pretty much what all romance comedies are. For horror films, you can start being like, okay, the jump scare is gonna happen in 3, 2, 1, and it happens, and you're like, it's not worth it anymore.
Now, another issue that kind of lends to that, which is something we talked about really early on, was also, at least in my opinion, with the exception, obviously, Get Out, Us, and all that, a lot of horror movies soundtracks don't slap as hard as they used to.
Yeah.
I think a lot of what built up those old school horror movies, we were talking about Psycho, the Halloween, all these movies, was that the soundtrack always made you feel on edge. And Halloween alone, when it shows Michael Myers just kind of stalking from a distance,
And you hear that da na na da na na da na da na.
but it's very, very faint. And that's actually a movie that I think the new sequel, it's a sequel. The new sequel did really well because it didn't shy away from kind of keeping those old elements and just kind of incorporating it into a modern setting.
I completely agree with you. I 100% think I don't agree with the thought that music is worse in the films nowadays.
Yeah, it's not worse. It doesn't invoke as much as it used to.
Yeah, it doesn't. You don't have these. I'm gonna use this word, but I mean it in a different way. You don't have these bangers of music that these old stuff had, like the old Jaws theme. I mean, anyone who was born in our generation knows that theme. These themes were so. You couldn't pretty much have the movie without that theme and it would have worked. With horror films nowadays, they don't put that much emphasis on these iconic themes, but I think like I will give it. If we were going rating, I would say for music, I would give it to old horror. Cuz there's nothing that beats Psycho and that screeching, like, I don't know, I think it's a cello or something like that. Yeah, exactly.
No.
Yeah, there's nothing that beats that type of stuff.
And like I said, horror movie, it is hard, at least in modern day, to kind of come up with different plots that stand out. Like I said, we're always going to use the exceptions of our Us's and our Midsummers because old school horror kind of hit a lot of these benchmarks that kind of, you have The Exorcist with demonic possession. You have It with the clown. You have Halloween with kind of like the serial killer, So it's very hard nowadays to come up with original plots. And like I said, we do have our Us's and the Midsummer and Hereditary, which kind of some of them are stuff that we've already seen, but it incorporates new elements that kind of revitalize it. Like one remake, quote unquote, that I'm very, very excited for is Candyman. Candyman, I think, is going to be phenomenal because it seems, from what I've seen from the trailer, it seems to still have those roots and just, once again, same with Halloween, just kind of bring it into a modern setting.
I know that it's not talked about a lot. It was kind of really popular for a little bit, but then it kind of jumped off.
I definitely think it's like a cult horror movie. Like it definitely is kind of on the back catalog of horror movies.
There was this horror movie. Let me remember the name for a second. That came out just recently. I think right before COVID destroyed the world. I believe it was last December in 2019. I think The Invisible Man came out.
The Invisible Man came out, I want to say...
It came out in the last 2 years. And that movie was really well done.
Amazing movie.
And it kind of... That's the thing. Like I kind of, every time I see a film like Candyman and stuff like that, I kind of feel like, I'm like, why did you have to touch something that didn't need to be touched? The last thing I want is for them to make Jason look like he did at the end of his entire debacle.
You mean Jason that was Manhattan, the greatest cinematic masterpiece of all time.
Like that's where I start to have a problem with new horror cinema, is that they take these epic like entities that we fear so much because of their like old stuff, and then they just ruin them. I will say that the Halloween did all right. I mean, nothing has been able to hit as hard as the original Halloween for me. If they ever touch Exorcist, I'm gonna lose my mind.
Hey, Donald, is it
Um,
a bad time to tell you now that they're touching The Exorcist? They confirmed they're doing a remake, reboot, whatever the crap you want to call it. But once again, I don't know. Like it has the potential, but I don't think CGI Exorcist is going to scare me as much as practical effect. If
I
they
mean,
announce that they're going to do practical effects Exorcist, down maybe.
I mean, it's not going to be a good movie. I'm telling you right now. If you've ever watched the Exorcist universe, because there are other Exorcist movies other than the original Exorcist, you will know that it just won't work. The original
No, of course,
Exorcist was a singular, almost godlike piece of cinema that should never ever be touched.
of course.
It came out and it's based on such a weird and cult like situation. I don't know, dude.
You
I
know
don't know.
what type of movies, and you just brought them up. Cults in real life scare the crap out of me. I think those are
Oh,
the type of movies that just
this is
absolutely
this is
because
a perfect this is
my
a
thing
perfect
is you were
segue.
saying how Jaws is perfectly like kind of the fear of the unknown, right? I'm more scared
Mhm.
of the fear of reality. These
Yeah,
movies that like a really good movie that I really enjoy that's modern. I think you've watched. I think we've talked about it. Is Hush on Netflix.
I like
And
it.
Hush,
I think
Hush
it's a good
one,
movie.
I love it because it has such a unique concept. It touches upon, the idea of not having sound, which obviously with movies, sound is a big thing.
Yeah.
But movies like that where it's literally another one, which is modern, which still terrifies me just because of it, is The Strangers.
Yeah,
Because
that one's kind of that
The
one
Strangers is
terrified
literally
me.
just like you're just in your home and you just got home invaded by insane people. Like that's
Yeah.
that's insane to me. But you were gonna bring up a point of that segue.
So this is a perfect segue, and I'm gonna try to hit home on the fact of we're in the golden age of horror. Um, and this is also because I intake media like it's there's no tomorrow. But I really want a lot more people to kind of touch on these stuff. The horror films and all of that stuff are iconic. Don't get me wrong. The Midsommars, oh my god, the Babadook and all of those stuff. But if you really, really, really want to get into this horror um kind of mind space and see why I think we're in the best moments of horror, do me a favor and go to Crib TV. Just
I'm so glad
just
you brought that up.
just go ahead, like go ahead and do me the favor. The things that they're doing in Crib TV are they're paying homage to the greatness that is old school horror, but they're bringing the new twist on it and they're giving it that new horror kind of take. The things that I've said make me more fearful, the things of putting the human aspect to it. And then if you get into Crib TV and you're like, I really love this, then do me a favor and go to a channel called I'll pick one. Go to a channel called Nightmind. And he
Oh,
these other YouTube channels touch on a thing that is very famous, not very famous, that is very popular in their communities called unfiction. And what unfiction is that there are these creators who create a storyline and disseminate it on things like YouTube, things like Twitter, things like Facebook, like things like TikTok. And they give it to you as if it's real time and happening there. It's unfiction, meaning it's fiction, but it's happening like if it were not fiction. And the I've never felt more fear than and more like chills down my spine than I feel when watching things from unfiction. Because if it, like I follow a couple of TikToks and there are these really out of this world type of situations. Like I'll give you a really easy example, and I'll wrap it up. I promise. There's this TikTok that is about this man who's a security guard at a cemetery, and he's just doing TikToks, and then after a couple months, he's like, "Oh, these really weird things are happening. Let's see if we can find them." And for the next like 3 months, every single night something's happening in that cemetery, and like the more and more you pause and you look into it, you see these like these like children like shadows moving in the darkness, and it is terrifying. It is absolutely like cripplingly terrifying because like we said, the things that are like based on true events no longer scare you until they really seem like they're true. And things like TikTok and YouTube are not like these films that are like easily curated and easily like put down to the T what it's going to happen. They're fucking terrifying. And that's why my final point on why I think that we're in the golden age of horror.
Oh, I thought you were gonna bring up. I thought you were saying you have another. All right, that's fine.
No,
Yeah,
that's
slightly piggybacking on that. By the way, we do really good. If we ever get promoted by these things, they should just promote like because we talk highly of them. The best thing about Crypt TV, for those who are unfamiliar, which I definitely think if you're a horror fan or you just want to delve into it, Crypt TV is like a really good start. Is there are two different sides of Crypt TV. There's these episodical ones where kind of there's these like short films that have nothing to do with each other, but there are like ongoing quote unquote like series, like and they're more based off the entity. One of me and Donald's absolute favorite is called the Looksee,
Oh
which
my god. I was gonna ask which one is your favorite.
yeah,
My favorite
the
one is the
Looksee,
Looksee.
the Looksee is it's just it's a very it kind of takes you back to this like creature that
It's almost
yeah it's
Slenderman-esque.
evil, yes, which actually was gonna segue perfectly into my kind
Which,
of
by the way, Slenderman was unfiction at the beginning. Just saying.
yes, which
Just saying.
we actually have to. I have another podcast topic, a little spoiler alert that we're going to talk about, which is kind of creepy pasta and the effect it had on the horror genre. But this is going to be my one fan question of the day that I'm going to be asking
Okay.
us, and we're rounding off. Which, by the way, Donald, thank you for your input on New School. And like I said, I think we both, at the end of the day, we both just love the horror genre, and we're really
No,
content with the
and
way
for
that it's
every
been going and the way it's going to keep going.
Of course. And for everyone watching and everyone listening, please let us know which side of this debate you kind of lean on. Obviously, like both of us are right. Both types of cinema and both types of genre, whether old school or new school, are fantastic. But do you like old cinema, old school horror cinema, or the new age of horror that is happening? And just let us know in the comments of the YouTube video that we release alongside the podcast. Or if you're listening on podcast, you can obviously head to the Nerd Slice on any social media and let him know where you kind of side on this debate.
Man, you plugged for me. This is like the reverse of earlier when you said I took all of your stuff. But no, my final question, which I don't think we're gonna offend anyone because it's gonna be universal. What in your opinion has been the absolute worst horror movie that you've seen in the last like 7, 10 years, whatever, the modern age?
Paranormal Activity 4.
I haven't even seen it, but I
So
will absolutely take your word for it.
do you want me to tell you the story?
Is that the one with the blonde girl?
So I have no fucking clue, to tell you the
Okay,
truth.
because I know there was one
I went
that like
so
I tapped out at 2. Like that was the last
Yeah.
one that I saw.
I saw one and I really liked one, and then I didn't watch any other Paranormal Activities until, and here's the story on why. Until I asked this girl on a date, and she's like, okay, and I was like, you know how we were. Paranormal Activity 4 came out when I was in high school, and you know how we are. It's like you take them to a horror film.
You want to be the macho man that
Yeah.
they hold on to. Is
So I'm
happy.
there.
Yeah, I
I'm
get
there watching this film, and I'm laughing my ass off because it is the most like formulistic, stupidest film in the world. But the part that got me was that the girl next to me was laughing even harder. And there's a moment where, and you guys in the comments can tell me if I have the wrong Paranormal Activity. I probably do. But all of like the kitchen stuff is on the roof, and the jump scares that it all falls down. And I'm there like, this is ridiculous. And the girl next to me goes, Coño, eso me pasó en Cuba, at the loudest possible way in this theater packed with people. And dude, I was so shook. I was on the floor crying of tears because I could not believe that she had said that, and it was hilarious. It was the worst film. Holy Christ. And then if I had to do an honorable mention, and this is gonna piss off a lot of people, I hate, and I mean completely and utterly loathe, the Blair Witch Project movie. The original and its sequel.
I was about to ask you because I didn't watch
I
it,
hate
but
them.
I know that there was a sequel.
I hate them. I hate them. And people are like, oh, but the Blair Witch Project is so good. It started the found footage. I hate found footage. The Troll Hunter is the only one that I've ever seen do it like good. But I hate found footage. Don't have such a shaky camera where I feel like I'm having a headache just trying to figure out what the blur is.
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, I know. I know your passion will bleed. But yeah, definitely. I agree with you. Like I said, I only watched the first Paranormal Activity, so that's where I tapped out. I watched a little bit of the second one, but we didn't talk about Nightmare Before Christmas. Is not a horror movie. We're not even gonna produce that. Mine, which I think I've mentioned before on the podcast, or maybe in a stream or something. I absolutely hated the Slender Man movie, like with a passion.
Oh.
Like I went into
Oh.
theaters knowing it was
Oh.
gonna be bad, and I still went in there like, let's see what happened. I walked out of that theater and go, cool, I want my money back.
I
Like it
I
was,
completely agree.
and the thing is, going into it is, me and you talk about, Slenderman was such a big thing, not just for horror, but for like pop culture. The Slenderman phenomenon took off, but then, which I will recommend this to you guys if you guys are okay with more of the, visceral, real life sort of things. Watch this documentary called Beware the Slenderman. Really, really good. It's on YouTube, I think, all of it, and it's on HBO Max. But,
Or watch Marvel Hornets, which is the original unfiction storyline made for Slenderman. Back when Slenderman wasn't called Slenderman, he was called the Operator.
Fun fact, we know the person. I don't know if you knew this. We know the person that knows the person that did that.
Yeah,
We'll talk off stream after that. But Slenderman was, going into it, I was really trying because I really did like the Slenderman, ideology and lore and all that, because creepypastas were cool and all that. The movie was terrible. I absolutely hated it. Go watch the documentary. It goes into, which is the reason why the movie was delayed, because the movie was filmed like 5 years ago.
No.
But then they didn't release it because of these two girls that actually ended up killing their friend.
No, the girl lived.
You're right. The girl lived. They attempted to kill their friend, which the mere fact that she's alive. I'm not gonna say
mind you, they stabbed her a lot of times.
Yeah, I'm not gonna say how many, because like I said, I do want, if you're interested in it, definitely go watch it, because it goes into the before, the during, and the after. Like it shows you the after effect psychologically of these girls and their families and all that. But that's the reason why so they released Slenderman like years like after Slenderman was already lost that hype. Like obviously he's still there, it's still etched in horror history and all that, but they just did not plan that movie out well. The CGI was terrible. I didn't even feel for any of the characters. They were all just, they had this stupid, which we should have talked a little bit about this, the stupid horror tropes of stupidity, of I heard a loud noise in the forest, I'm gonna go to it, or oh my god, this door opened by itself, I should go in there, which are the horror movie tropes where sometimes they're entertaining to watch, but then other times you're just like, people are stupid.
We can talk about that next podcast when we talk about our best horror films.
Yes. So this is going to be the plug, which, as you know, is the 1 minute where we plug everything. So you can, Tono basically already said it, you can find us everywhere on social media. Instagram at the Nerd Slice. I was about to say Facebook. TikTok, Nerd Slice. Twitch. Obviously, if you're watching this on YouTube, we're on YouTube. But yeah, that's our stuff. Definitely, we didn't do fan questions this time around just because for these topic ones, I figured it's better just to go into it. But definitely send us your fan questions. Let us know your favorite horror movies. That's what we're going to be talking about next time. So definitely send us your horror-related questions, whether it's about favorite horror movies that we haven't heard of, recommendations, and Tono, your minute is now on. So
okay, so I have a lot to say. So if you want, we're also going to be playing spooky games all throughout October. We have started with Phasmophobia. You will see a video on the Nerd Slice YouTube of our Phasmophobia in about a week, but we do stream that every Wednesday on both the Nerd Slice Twitch and Jack Prog, which is my personal Twitch. You can find me at Jack Films on all social media, and you can also find a kind of subset of what I'm doing called the Log Line. I am going to be releasing my first video in about a week about why I think that Halloween is not a horror movie, not a slasher horror movie, but a psychological horror. So you can tune into that.
I'm glad you changed that the last thing, because I was going to be like, Hold the
No,
fuck up. Total.
it's not a slasher movie, but a psychological horror movie, and that's gonna be our first video for Logline. So if you wanna hear a little bit more of my opinions about films, in more of a short form kind of content, you can find it at the Logline. Not at the Logline, just Logline. I have to it's a brand new channel. Give me a little bit of a break, but I think I hit a minute, and yeah.
Perfect. And once again, Donald, thank you for coming on.
Always, dude.
You're going to be here next week as well, so we may have another guest here joining us. So
and really quickly. I need this for you guys. You guys need to tell us what you want us to wear at the end of in October. Like at the end of the October, we're gonna have a podcast, and I want all of the viewers. I'm mobilizing your entire viewer base to pick a onesie that I can buy and I can wear at the last one. It has to be a onesie though. Nah, dude, onesies are so comfortable, and I'm not gonna buy no costume because there's no costume parties because of COVID. So I am wearing a onesie.
I already have my Halloween podcast final costume planned. I just gotta buy it.
And that is why I'm mobilizing your audience to pick mine.
Of course. So yes, definitely tweet at me or Thono, whichever onesie. I already have mine picked out. If no one comes through, I have which one I already want you to wear.
Okay.
But yes, if you guys want to see Thono in a very strange onesie or a cool onesie, definitely let us know. And until
this onesie was picked by my Twitch viewers.
You have two of them apparently, so
I do.
If you ever want to slide one my way, just let me know. But thank you once again, Thono, for being on here. Thank you guys for watching. And for this month, stay spooky.